We're live. And we're live. I wish we got the countdown in action, but I'm glad that Jess says us going strong. I know how to use the finger motions and everything, but I thought you guys would laugh at me.
Well, what would be wrong with that?
I was just going to say, welcome to our 4th installment. No one's taking us off the air, and no one's asked us not the podcast. So we're still here and podcasting live and interactive from the interwebs. So please join us. I'm tweeting out the hashtag as well as the link. So where are the Googles? If you're here listening live, welcome. If you're watching us later, thanks for tuning in later, because it's not happy hour everywhere in the world, but we're glad you're here anyways. A quick round of introductions for those who don't know us. I'm just going to go down the list. We have a Google Doc, and it kind of keeps us organized as well. The podcast itself is about women who work in higher ed and also wine, but wine by the drinking ways. So we all have a glass. Cheers, launch. And we're going to chat with you today as a recap from the OLC Innovate Conference from New Orleans. I'm hosting because I'm a little biased about the conference, so I'm looking forward to hearing and sharing and learning all of everyone's experiences, but of course we have to tell you what's uncorked first. So I'm going to throw to Tanya to share about her vino today.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, for those of you who have joined us for the last 3 episodes, guess what I'm drinking today? The same thing. So this is just what I drink all the time, and I don't care what you call me or if you want to make fun of me, it is what it is. Marcus James Melbeck. Good stuff.
All right, Nori, what's in your palate today? What are you tasting?
I'm glad to follow up your ongoing consistency. This time I'm drinking a white. I found this one mostly because there was a coupon on my app at the grocery store, and so I was like, sure. But it does have all the tasting notes that I like, vanilla and creamy character. I am one of those old school California Chardonnay. I love oak and butter, and while this isn't super oaky or buttery, it's not the grassy stainless steel kind of stuff. So I like it. Chloe Chardonnay, it's from Sonoma.
Is Chloe new, like a new brand? I feel like I've seen it around a little bit recently.
I don't know. I really don't know. I've never seen it before, and because I literally, I have an app that alerts me to things in the grocery store, and I just bought it because it knew all about me. It data mined me, and it matched us up, and so we're here together today.
I think it's there. It was there in 2012 when I passed through your neck of the woods driving on a road trip, so it's fairly young. I think it's a young vineyard within the last decade, but it's been around. All right, Jess, what you drinking?
I too have to find my unmute button. I see we have 3 viewers. I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat window, so if you're not, please let us know or hit us up on Twitter. I've got 2 computers. So I'm drinking Bullet Bourbon again. It's like a wine. It's made out of, I don't know, corn or wheat or whatever whiskey is made of. I just forgot to stop and get wine. That's where I'm at.
Oh, that's okay, Jess. We'll accept your bullet one more time. Patrice, what are you drinking? Tell us a little about it.
So I normally drink a red, as those of you who have been watching previously know, but we were making a seafood dish and needed a little white wine, so of course I had to drink the rest of it. So it's actually a white Burgundy wine from France, and I wanted to note that the glass that I'm drinking out of is a hand-painted glass by my neighbor from where I moved from, and a very dear friend, and she painted a set of these for me before I moved to Ithaca. So cheers to you, Marion.
Cool.
Totally awesome.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Patrice. My wine, I don't have the bottle with me, but I have a branded glass. It's from Becker. It's back to my Texas vineyard. It is a Pinot Grigio 2014. It's because I'm not in Texas a whole lot these days, or at least the month of April, so I thought I'd wrap up the month with a Pinot Gris. It's buttery. It's light, it's refreshing. It's really hot here, so it's about time for Tejas to enjoy some of its own wine. So I will say some housekeeping as we get rolling. Many of you are on the Twitters. That's great. And some of you aren't, and that's cool too. I'm going to drop in the doc again, or someone else will, on Twitter and Google+. If you'd like to contribute or ask questions, you can do that on our back channel using the hashtag WomenWhoWine.edu. You can comment on Google Plus, the page. I'll be checking that for comments. And the doc is open, so you can also contribute to that Google Doc. And there's a question and comments section at the bottom. I'm highlighting it right now if you're there. Please feel free to add to it as we go through. But let's get rolling with our tasting flight is simple today because we all just came back from Nolans. It is really to recap some of the conversations we had at the session we hosted right at 9 a.m. in the morning on last Thursday with the Women Who Wine and some of our colleagues and peers. So the question, and I think it was a really good question, was I like that Tanya prompted was, what did you experience over here about the way women work or innovate in higher ed? And this could be at the conference, at our session. Anyone care to go first?
Well, I'll be happy to start us off. I spent some time reflecting on it, where else but on the plane ride on the way home, and just kind of trying to think about all the stories I heard and thinking about, like, what was it all about? I think some things that I came away with was just an overall need to be valued and have our voice heard, but also that people just seem to really be feeling a sense of loss. There seemed to be, a lot of people really struggling in the workplace, and a sense of just continuing wanting to have something that they couldn't have, and just a lot of thankfulness to kind of have other people to talk to, and and share, and share where they were, so that they didn't feel so isolated. And for me, a big takeaway was sharing my story at the dinner. And for me, it was it was difficult to let myself be that vulnerable and share that story. But when people came up to me afterwards and told me, how it had impacted them, I think it really made me really reinforce the value of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and sharing with other people.
I'm going to toss this over to Tanya and explain. We did have a Women in Leadership dinner. It's where we purchased a ticket, which went to a cause to bring another woman to a future OLC, the Online Learning Consortium event. And so it was a nice way to connect with small conversations at tables over dinner. Patrice was one that shared her story, and then I'm going to pass it over to Tanya to share her thoughts, maybe on the dinner or others, as a nice segue in. So thanks, Patrice.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And I was at the same dinner as Patrice was just referring to and Laura was just describing. And so there was a few things that were pretty awesome. I've been going to this conference pretty much since it started, when it was the Emerging Tech Conference. Was going to the Blended Conference for, I guess, about 8 years. So very familiar with this conference, and I do have to say that in all the time that I've been going to these conferences, I've never seen, so many sessions, focus groups, and so forth just on women in ed tech, women as innovators, and these sorts of things. So it was great that there was the dinner, the Women in Ed Tech dinner. Also really fantastic that we got to share some of our stories at that dinner, and that I think it was really empowering to be vulnerable and yet be so accepted, because a lot of times we're sharing our stories in like little bubbles and igloos, and we're not talking to each other about our very similar lived experiences. And I think it really does empower us when we're sharing those stories with each other, when we identify similar struggles that we have as women. Another thing that was really great is that obviously us here, as well as our colleague Amy Collier, had facilitated a session. We facilitated a series of group discussions around some of the topics we drew out of the Women Who Wine, and the fact that, one, we weren't sure how many people would show up, and that we had wall-to-wall people, including they had to bring in additional chairs. And two, we had several men that had attended as well, when we were talking about women in ed tech around different issues that might be seen more as women issues, but are really everybody's issues in an organization and in ed tech. The third thing that I was involved in was the focus group for some new women in leadership initiatives that OLC wanted to sort of launch off the ground, and had some discussions about that. Really exciting that Liz Chavachi had mentioned this effort that we had, and as well as hers and other efforts in launching, some different initiatives within the OLC organization. So what this tells me is that, hey, this is time for us to, in this area, this is it. Like, there's a lot of us women here. There's lots of men that understand the need for equality and diversification in the organizations, in particular higher ed, which are sort of really archaic organizations because they've been around for so long. Majority of them were built by men and off of male practices. So just seeing these 3 events roll out this year, I've never seen anything like this. And it's great that we are giving voice to women, women's experiences, empower women, and thinking about how can we alter our organizations as well as our institutions in order to sort of pave this pathway to make it more of equal ground. So that's sort of what I felt from my conference experience. And so happy to do that with many of the women on this panel and listening here today.
Thanks, Tanya. No, it's been great to hear your experience. And I just want to give some shout outs to Janie and Callie and Megan and others on the back channel sharing their drinks, homemade recipes of limoncello, and also their thoughts. So please continue to tweet and share. I'm going to pass this over to, is it Nori or Jessica would like to go next?
I'll go.
Right.
So at first, when I noticed, so guys, I'm kind of an introvert, a little socially awkward, and when the room kept filling up, I was starting to go, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? How are we going to do this? And the conversation started a little slowly. I had a really big group, but here's what happened that really just surprised me and I had to take a break after, is the stories the women were sharing in that group were so vulnerable and so personal, that it was the first time in a very long time that I felt like we were having a conversation about the things that would really change the environment for women in leadership, women in tech, women in education, all of these things. It's hard to stand up and say, I've been abused at work. It's hard and it's scary and it's dangerous. And so it really felt like that was a safe place for everyone who was there. And there are things that we've talked about kind of offline about ways we can make it safer or make it, more engaging or something. But I was just amazed and awed and so impressed with the people who were willing to come into that room and say the scary thing to people they didn't know. And so that was, to me, I think, just phenomenal. And when we asked for the business cards, we get a stack of them, this big. So there are people who want to talk about that, and there are people who feel they need this outlet. So I thought that was really important and very cool.
Great. Nori, what do you want to add about your experience, whether it was about the session of the conversation or the conversations between the conversations from the conference?
I think, actually, I want to start off by giving a shout out to Whitney Kilgore, because the dinner that we're talking about was hosted by iDesign, and it really made a difference that somebody was willing to sponsor that space, because I think it facilitated most of the conversations we were. It was sort of the after party and the pre-party to a lot of things that that were around these topics that we're talking about today. So my experience was really personal in the session that we moderated when we sat at the tables. I had an interesting sort of play in my mind about the women who were sitting at the table, and then oddly the 2 men who joined us sat on either side of me. And I had this sort of like this motherly instinct, like I didn't want the guys to feel left out, but then I felt like, wow, I need to empower the women, and the hell with the guys, they can just listen. And so I just had all this stuff going on in my head, like I'm a moderator, I'm supposed to actually make everybody feel as though they have something valuable to say. And yeah, so I had my own internal struggle with, I am still not the most confident moderator around these issues. And I was especially not prepared to be inclusive of the male voice. And not the way that's coming out is I almost wanted to overprotect the men because I'm a chick. And then I had to stop myself. So that was a big thing for me. And then our conversation at my table, we decided to talk about mentoring. And that's going to get me, the next question we go around, that really segues into what happened to me in our discussion. So I'm going to kind of end my thought there about just, people shared a lot of things at my table, but for me, my biggest takeaway was I need to be really comfortable in this leadership role that the 5 of us have. People are looking to our confidence and to the way we handle ourselves, and I need to be really more prepared to lead in these kind of conversations.
Lori, I'm glad you brought that up about the participation of men in the group. I had one man in my group, and after the session was over, he wondered if maybe people were holding back because he was there, and we were kind of tossing around different potential future scenarios. But for me as a facilitator, I hesitated a few times. Like, for example, I asked the group if anyone had ever been sexually harassed. And I hesitated a little before I asked that because there was a man in the group, but I felt like, I wanted to ask it. And everyone in the group said, no, never, not me. And that was when the question came up later was, did having a man in the group prevent women from sharing, or maybe, they just didn't want to. But we would be interested in hearing from people across genders of, different types of scenarios. Would it make sense to maybe have an option for a men-only table, mixed table, or women-only table so that people could choose? Or, what are some different ways that we can mix it up? So we would love it if you would share your thoughts in the back channel.
I'm hoping that we, I think there's so much that we need to debrief about that. One of the things, we had already talked about having a session, like one of our future episodes be about men who have mentored us and the ways that we've had positive male mentorship in our careers. But I think there's some larger things that we can talk around as well. And I think several of us, I know Patrice, you and I ended up with one of the guys who was sitting at my table and a couple of other guys who were in the room and asked, would you guys have preferred your own table and to address the same questions but, as a separate group? And the guys at my table and I heard the guys at another table were like, no, we want to listen. We're not here to talk. We're here to listen and respectfully listen because we want to hear these. We want to hear this experience because we don't want to participate in continuing it.
And I brought the guys in my group in too. And at first I felt like I was forcing them because they were there to listen, and it took me a minute to figure that out. But toward the end, one of them shared experiences that he'd gone through with his wife, who was being terribly just abused and harassed at work. Things were terrible, and so he shared from that perspective, how can I support her, the things that she had gone through, and that spurred a whole separate spin-off conversation.
Yeah.
So I will cut you off on this, not to cut us off, but I will say we talked about facilitating these conversations in general, and it is a hard challenge, just for all inclusion, not even male, female. It's other people's willingness to share and be open, because there are stories and vulnerabilities that come out and are talked about. I will say, and Michael Berman will be fine with me mentioning, he is the CIO at Channel Islands, and he said essentially he wanted to be part of the conversation. And I think men need to do more than listen, I'll be honest. They need to be part of the conversation, because that's the only way we're going to move forward, is having everyone at the table. So as much as I would have said a single circle of men, what good does that do? But I will ask more or less and us to move on to another question, just because I know that I'm going to be cognizant of time and we will have a guest join us in a bit, is to think about, in the conversations we had, what is one thing, because we talked about issues, challenges, barriers, but we asked most of our tables to talk about solutions. And one of the questions is, what is one thing you want to work on and or go back to your campus or go back to your campus community and do to support women around you, including yourself. So what were some suggestions that came out of that? Because I think that was actually an interesting part of our conversation, at least within my table. But if anyone wants to share that, that might be a good way to go.
That was where my group really started to sparkle. So, you know, I said we started out slow, and then we kind of eased into some conversations, and then we got really vulnerable. And at that point, when that question came up, one of the women in my group stood up and said, we need to have this national conversation. We need to build this community, and we can't just sit here and think about it. We actually have to do something. So, you know, getting the business cards, putting them together, trying to expand this conversation a little bit. And everyone chimed in and said the same thing, and so we shared about different ways that we could start this and keep it going nationally and across institutions and across gender identification and all of that. So that was when we really got animated and excited about it.
I'll go next. I think, you know, our group talked about a lot of different programs and things that were going on at their universities, but what we kind of came to was that it really needs to be a grassroots effort. And, you know, you can have all sorts of, you know, programs and mentoring and whatnot going on, but if each of us doesn't every day actively think about how, you know, our own actions and how we can support those around us, those programs won't really help or do anything. So that was like, so my takeaway was to really just take the time out of my day to listen to other people's stories and just, you know, better understand them, what their challenges are, and that way gain a better understanding of how I can help them. I mean, I know we all get so busy and we're rushing from meeting to meeting trying to get things done, and sometimes that can be hard. But I think that's one of the best things we can do is just take the time to really thoughtfully listen to those around us.
A comment on Twitter, Michelle Katsky-Brock, I had tweeted, you know, how do we have these conversations? How do we get everybody at the table? And she brought up a very good point. If you're following the hashtag, she says, I think this is difficult to do in a conference session as the community is not established with those in the room. And when I talk about when my group started to sparkle, I think the interesting thing was that little group sort of became a community. And it is hard. I mean, that was one tiny micro community, right? So how do we expand this and make it safer to say, I was harassed in the workplace? I told my group, I was harassed in the workplace. And that was one of the first times I'd said it out loud. So, you know, that's a great question about expanding and how do we do that? How do we create that safe space?
I will share just from my table, and I was cognizant of my role was to facilitate. So it was really kind of cool to hear everyone participate that wanted to. And some actually, one person just wanted to listen, and she was like, "That's great. That's what I want to do because I'm not actually struggling with these issues." But she said something really cool is because we heard of different levels of people and their experiences and challenges. She said, "I'm actually listening to your stories, and that makes me think about how I just haven't thought to take the time out of my calendar, my schedule, to empower or lift other people up." And I thought that was really a good thing that we could all think of, which I was very helpful. And then Karen O'Shea from University of Dublin College said it best, we need to have more of these conversations and then do more of this, because I think our group, and Megan can tweet at this and say I'm a liar, she's on Twitter, actually took away some good narratives and some good ideas from one another because we brainstormed some solutions, and I'm happy to tweet out my blog post because I want to make space for others to talk here today.
I was gonna, one of the things I just thought of is that I was a little disheartened that my table had sort of came to the assumption, or this was strong feeling that diversity or gender equality or understanding women's value, which I like to talk about a little bit more, it has to be, or it comes easier, or we only really see it work in institutions where it's top down, where the president or the chancellor or the provost or somebody has decided that this is how the institution will be run. Now, I know many of us at director level positions or in leadership level positions, we can make that happen within our units. I think also, though, that really makes me sad because when we think about postmodern theory and organizational studies, it's little behaviors. that we can change, that we can do, that can recreate a structure that leads to understanding of women's value, more empowering of women in their actions and their activities and different things like that. So, so I don't think we want to just, wait for the leadership to come around. I think there are different strategies that we can use within our units. Anybody can at any level within higher education as a field, and specifically in ed tech, to make this happen. Patsy Moskal and Mary Nemec, I very much so look up to, because I watch them take these little actions, and then I go, oh, wait, there's a keynote. Who's the woman I could identify for this? There's an award. What's a woman around me that I could uplift for this, or a woman I could recommend? Things I didn't always think about, and I just never even realized it. But watching and seeing what they've done has really been a role model for me as far as what I can do, and their little actions, even the same thing with my staff. So yeah, that was just my thought, that we shouldn't always wait for leadership at the job or to move into a new institution. It doesn't hurt to look at who's the board there, what's the administration like, and those sorts of things to find out, is it going to be more difficult for you to move through that structure than other places, for example?
I'll jump in, because that segues into one of my biggest takeaways from the dinner, where both Tanya and Patrice shared some of their background in leadership, and it was especially poignant, I think, for everybody in the room. But I started thinking about, I was sitting at a table, so I had Patrice on one side of me and Tanya right next to me, but there was, I think, tables of 10, and one of the women at our table, I think, was really honored, first of all, to be asked, and she really wanted to share and join and participate. And I had a sense of, I could see her need to feel this really strong connection with those of us at the table, and that she felt like that was part of this dinner that we were all invited to. And I had two thoughts. Like, the initial was, I should be her best friend, and I should, find a way to spend time with her and make her feel really good, which is just sort of a weird enabling first thought. And then my next thought was, well, I would be hard to approach, and so the fact that she's being so vulnerable, there's something about all of us in this group that can enable and empower people at conferences in a really simple way, by seeing somebody, acknowledging them, and giving them some kind of a small challenge, which was the approach I decided to take with this woman. I couldn't just like take her and just bring her into our community right then, but what I did say is, in this time next year, so let's mark this in 1 year. Promote yourself and your voice by thinking about what it is you're passionate about and what makes you stand out as a female and as a leader in your career. And find ways to have that voice, whether it's in conference sessions or something culturally that matches your career. And this time next year, I want to find you again at this dinner, and I want you to share with me what you've done and how it's promoted you. And I just felt like that was a give I'd never thought about before. It came out so easily that I don't know why I haven't been able to do something like that previously, but it just felt like that's a really actionable and simple thing to do, to see someone and promise, I'm going to see you next year, and I'm going to hear how amazing this year has been for you. So that was my big takeaway about what I could do to support.
I like that Michelle Harrison has a similar sentiment up from Canada. She was at the session. She said she needs to think more actively about what things I can do better to be a better colleague and mentor. And I think that's just a good practice that we haven't really thought about. And we said our life gets really busy, and we are just trying to advance. And we had a question at our table around experience, education, doing more. And we're doing more to prove ourselves more. And this came from a senior leadership position that managed below her, were in her organizational structure, were all men who felt that she wasn't qualified enough. Mind you, she has a PhD, she's quite an avid researcher, she's really a strong leader, but she always had to continue to prove herself. And she said, I've never actually thought about other women that I could uplift when I'm trying to keep my own head above water. And so that made me think about that. And not everyone shared that same sentiment at our table, but it was good that we all heard that. I think that was really empowering to me.
That's interesting that you talk about having to prove yourself to the men. One of the things that came up in our table is having to prove yourself to other women, or being in competition with other women, or having other women hold you down. There actually was some research on this, quite a while ago, about how females end up seeking out male mentors because females who are more senior tend to not want to mentor younger women. They feel that they need to go through the same pain sort of in strife that they did in order to move up. And so they tend to not want to make the path easy for younger women. I mean, this study has got to be at least 10 plus years old. So that was a conversation that came up at our table. Is the one, this is not my word, but one person actually used the word cattiness, this judgment or being critical of each other as women rather than trying to help women out. And another interesting thing was from one of the women in my panel, and she's like, well, because, women can already out the jump never be as good as a man, so you don't compete against the men, you compete against each other. And it is a really interesting thing in our society. It's like apples and oranges. Well, I'm never going to be an orange, so I'm just going to compete with this other apple. And it's embedded in our culture, this sort of infighting within the female gender, or, biological sex, whatever way you want to frame it or are comfortable with framing it. But it is a really interesting thing that sometimes that could be another challenge that we have to deal with, and just making ourselves aware that we might have tendencies to be more competitive with our female colleague than we might our male colleague, and just be aware of that.
My group was also really interesting in that we understood that we didn't have answers to some stuff, so we shared ideas and whatever, but so I just looked at the Google Plus page, and Janie asked that she's looking for tips on salary negotiation and a job search, and that came up twice in our group conversation, and sadly none of us really had any ideas about what to do in that regard. We had some stories that weren't terribly positive about trying to, but we got to the point where we're like, okay, well, how can we keep talking about this, and what can we do, and who can we involve? So in some ways, like, we made great progress, and in others it was just like, well, we still don't really know what's going on at all.
Well, I think just sharing the stories and starting the conversations seem to be really key and important. And in hearing other people going through and experiencing some of the same things, again, it kind of opens you up to saying, I'm not the only one that's feeling this way. And we talked a lot about the competitiveness issue, and the feeling that it's a lot of it stems from insecurities, and that many women might lack confidence or insecurity, or we talk a lot about the imposter syndrome, and that's what drives many of us to be competitive. And that maybe if we start these conversations, and if we begin to share and be vulnerable again and say I'm insecure, or I'm not confident in this, that both we realize we're all feeling that way, but also the importance of building each other up, and and again supporting each other and encouraging each other.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to share Amy. I'll give you a tidbit. She actually wrote and drafted some deep reflections, so I'm going to touch on a little bit. So Amy Collier couldn't make the call today, but she wanted to share her experiences. So people were essentializing it like, oh, we need to make the workplace more women-friendly, so let's make a no evening email policy. But they really talked about practices, policies, and respect about time, and our group said the same thing about workplace culture, which is really interesting, about how we need to be having these caring conversations and realistic expectations of what work life and culture is. So ours, like Amy's, came about cultures, and then she talked a bit about a concern about a women on her team. There's only one woman on a leadership team, and she took on the task to do note taking, and she just because it had to get done and no one else stepped up. And her concern was that she did not know if she was experiencing a microaggression, or if she should try to address it. And maybe that's something we don't think about because we just take on things. And so these were just a few of the experiences. And please read more. And I'm going to share more about this after the podcast to share about experiences. But if you have some, we've added open space at the bottom of the document. We'd love for you to contribute your reflections. I know some of you are chewing on that a bit more in the coming week. Please continue to add to that, and we'll revisit and give a highlight reel of this afterwards.
Now I'm looking at everybody's reflections in the document. So Michelle Pacansky-Brock included some as well.
Yeah, they're good. When's Michelle going to join us? She's in moments, yes?
Yeah, she'll be in about 9 minutes. But Tanya, sorry, did you want? I didn't mean to interject there. Do you want to follow up?
I'm sure I did, but I don't remember what I was going to say at all.
Well, I'll just throw in one last thing then that we talked about, and that was trying to look at the importance and value of care work in general, and how sometimes there can be resentment around maternity leave or even paternity leave for people that don't have children. And is there a way to incorporate time for personally meaningful work for everyone? Because allowing people to do that and have that time will actually make them more productive and happier at work, and reduce some of that resentment. And so people should be able to have that time to volunteer, help out, help in a foster home, whatever the case may be. That it doesn't necessarily have to be child or even elder care specific. And how do we change the culture around that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so that brings me back to my point, Laura, that I was thinking of, because Patrice had talked about that being supportive versus being critical. And there's sort of this, there's a theory called conservative control, but lots of times I see in situations and in units I've led, women being controlling over other women, trying to monitor their bodies for them, monitor their dress, making comments, monitoring their time in seat time, monitoring their projects, their work, their productivity. So you see this sort of women monitoring women, keeping them in check, this competitive thing. It's not supportive at all, and it's highly critical, and it's highly conservative control. Although it could lead to some great productivity because there's sort of this thing. In the long run, it's not going to be healthy for anybody involved. To the point where I've seen some pretty, some pretty unprofessional things, yelling, tears, different things like that happen. And so I think that Patrice raises a good point because, we are sort of living within these masculine hierarchical structures that sometimes can lead us to be this way when really we can embrace more of the quote-unquote feminine organizational qualities like emotion labor, but those can be good things, So, like Jess was talking about, although she encourages self-care for her staff, not so good at self-care for herself. But although the people who do sort of the emotion labor tasks might be a little less productive because they're taking a walk with somebody that's having a bad day, they're making sure that somebody ate, these sorts of things, in the long run, everyone is more productive because the people who take on these roles. At the same time, those of us who do have other care matters that we have to attend to, like family and our kids or those sorts of things, a unit that supports our ability to do that is going to end up being a better unit. We are going to be more productive. And so having a child getting on the baby track is not necessarily a bad thing for a unit in the long run. Having people that have empathy and prioritizing this care is not necessarily a bad thing for productivity. You can't necessarily quantify it, and this is coming from a quantitative researcher who thinks she can quantify anything. But in the long run, it creates a different organizational culture and a different climate. Everybody has less burnout, less stress, and it's going to lead to greater rewards in the long run. Or at least that's
I don't want. Yeah, I'm going to drop my Canadian card and just say it was amazing when we have 9-month maternity leave. And it could be paternity and it could be for other leave. We have sabbaticals in general we could take at our institutions of higher ed. the positive side of that we don't think about in the U.S. is actually the mentoring, the academic preparedness, career development it gives to those who come for a temporary position. Because one, they're prepared to come in, they're prepared to be there 9 and up to maybe 12 months even. And that becomes a contract for a lot of new professionals or people changing careers. And it's not to say that they don't leave the unit, because they mostly do. They know it's a contract. But sometimes positions get created, things get crafted. And in my own, I was in an advising and career center and employment center unit. We actually had 3 positions created based on the people who were in there actually got to get their feet wet in a career, develop some ideas and promote some programs, and then honestly helped our unit thrive. And so I just thought it was I would love to see that in the U.S. I think it provides so much opportunity for people transitioning careers within higher ed specifically, and we can do it really well. We're supposed to be that institution that's supportive in different ways for our learners, sometimes faculty, but why aren't we doing this for all around, that they have some freedom to come and go, and we consider that as a holistic person. There was a tweet, and there was a Google Plus message. Janie put out the article, and some of you may have read it. I tweeted out, it's the Vitae, Ladies Let's Negotiate, and she asked the question specifically, she's considering a job change and sees that there's good suggestions about looking at the board and executives, so she really liked that comment that was earlier mentioned in the podcast. She wonders if anyone could possibly provide her with some advice on salary negotiations. So she said that women who negotiate are seen as right off the bat and less competent, whereas men are not seen as less competent. And I don't know if anyone has thoughts. Yeah, Tanya, go.
Sorry, I'm trying to multitask poorly. Yeah, so really interesting. I mean, first of all, there's lots of research on this, right? That women normally take whatever offer they're given because they're just so happy to have an offer. Number 2, men usually negotiate. And exactly that. Women are expected to take the offer. They're not expected to negotiate, where men are. This actually is rooted in the fact that traditionally men were the breadwinners, so they were able to negotiate for more because they were feeding their family and those sorts of things. Where I'm the breadwinner in this house, as many women are today. And so I think that has to change. And again, I have negotiated deals, and I will tell you, when the female went to negotiate with me, I was like, holy smokes. And so it's really interesting because I had a little prejudice there and realized it and needed to check it. I think a lot of times those things are sort of innate in us because of this is sort of how we've been socialized through the work process. So honestly, what I do as somebody is I give the person the maximum I can give them, period. If I'm hiring you, I'm going to give you the maximum I can give you with my budget, what I've allocated, because I want you on my team. So there really is no negotiation. I'm giving you the maximum. This is where we're at. And so there are some other little things, but maybe we need to start thinking about that. I've seen a lot of times where women have been brought in when I look at payroll, budgets, and all the women are 5,000 less than all the men were or more. And you start to wonder. I do know the EEOC has sort of a thing now about salary being equal, and so there are ways to make adjustments even in public institutions for that. But I would encourage everyone to negotiate their salary. I mean, unless I'm hiring you, then you got the maximum. But anyways, I would encourage everyone to negotiate, and for women to apply for jobs they might not think they're qualified for, and to negotiate that salary for more. So, sorry.
And negotiate for your peers. So I sit on a hiring committee, and my chair, and I love her. She's sassy and great she's in library science. She actually fought tooth and nail to get this lead researcher, who is a female one and a lead in the area, and said, yes, she deserves a salary. And we sound like a squeaky wheel, but we're like, here's an email again, 5 months later. We still want her 5 months later. You do need to fight for them, and you need to be on those hiring committees. You need to be on those decision-making processes. All up the level of career and hiring, I think, is really important, because we get into this habit in higher ed of compressed salaries, right? So if you've been around a lot, they take advantage of that. Any new hire, male or female, they'll get the higher pay. So you really have to move out. And our group talked about it. You have to move up. To move up, you have to move out. which means you have to go to another institution, or geography, and does geography by choice or sacrifice limit some of us? And that was a good, healthy conversation we had, that, hey, maybe salary and job ladders would be a good conversation down the road.
In public sector, too, I probably made close to what I made when I came to UWM 12 years ago. So we've had salary increase freeze after salary increase freeze. So when you come into a public institution, you're not going to get like the average standard increase necessarily. You might never get an increase, and then you might have to pay double your benefits, and you have to pay double into your retirement, and all these weird things that you have no control over. So I just, from my experience coming into a public institution, definitely negotiate what you can. I think also those of us as women can come together and help each other through our negotiation for these job offers.
Yeah, well, and that's, Tanya and I were having a back channel conversation. I recently negotiated for a job, and I reached out to her, and Tanya and I created just this whole side-by-side list, like what I was walking away from, what I needed to have at least a lateral move. We did research on what else was out there nationally on comparable jobs, so that by the time I walked in, you know, by the time I got an offer and was ready to counter, I was studied and prepared, and I knew exactly what I was going to ask for, and I knew every reason why I was going to ask for it. So, you know, Tanya was instrumental in doing that, and she's just my go-to woman. That's who I bounce ideas off of. So I would encourage those of you out there, like, that's a mentorship role that's short-term and could really help one another. Reach out to somebody and ask, how do I do this? Practice a little bit. Find out how to do the research, how to compare what you're leaving, what you're going to, and be ready.
I'll try to blog post, too, on some of the criteria or different contingent plans that we put together if anyone's interested in that.
Yeah, please do. I want to welcome our guest of the hour, Michelle Pacansky-Brock. I like it because she has her Twitter handle on her shirt, so you can see Pacansky there. Michelle designs human-centered learning experiences, and I think it's really cool. She works at the teaching and learning innovation area, and she's a specialist there at CSU Channel Islands. So hello, Michelle. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. I have my my very special Mama Needs Some Wine glass that my sister gave me.
Love it.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Love it.
We'll raise our glasses to Michelle. Welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, Michelle, you're coming into salary, but we asked you to come share your experiences and kind of gave you a prompt about we did a recap of the OLC Innovate.
Yeah, I've been listening. Yeah.
I knew you'd be checking in on this just in case we trash talked anyway. So, yeah. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
Well, some of your conversation about, you know, paid maternity, paternity leave, when I had it brought me back to when I was first hired as a full-time faculty member. And I had my first child already, who was 16 months old, and extremely difficult 16-month-old child. And I was stepping into my full-time faculty role, and 2 days before I started teaching full-time, I found out by surprise I was pregnant with my second. And I had to go to my dean, who was a woman, who was a fabulous woman. Actually, we're still very good friends, and this is many years ago. And basically, I felt like I was apologizing for being pregnant. You know, oh, I'm so sorry, you just hired me, and now I'm going to have to take time off. And as I was saying those words, I was just saying, I could hear this voice in my head going, what's wrong with you? You know, listen to what you're saying. Do you think your husband's at work apologizing because we're going to have a child? And then the next wonderful thing that I found out was the leave that I received was 5 days. I'm not kidding. 5 days was in the contract. So yeah, it was quite a harrowing experience. And I had just come from the private sector, where I think, you know, I would have felt more comfortable, and I would have had better actually leave at the position I was in that space. So those were just some of the reflections that were coming over me that I haven't thought about in so long. But yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Not very inclusive.
What do you do with 5 days of maternity leave?
Not much.
I had 0. In the state of Wisconsin, you get 0. You can take your vacation or your banked sick days, but yeah, you get nothing.
Well, and that's true, and that would have been true in my situation also, but the faculty union had negotiated 5 days, which to me makes me think, how did you come up with 5 days?
I know.
But yes, you're right. That was what was said. Well, you can take, all your vacation and sick time. And I said, well, I'm brand new, so when I have my baby, I'll only have been teaching a semester. So, yeah, I was kind of an interesting case, I guess.
I was
when I had all of my kids, I was in the private sector, and so I was able to take 6 months off, which I guess now that was a long time ago. How lucky I was to have that.
Yeah.
Michelle, it's good to. I'm glad you could jump right in because you are like that. I've worked with you before, and it's been a joy to have you on the show. But I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your experience, because I think I gave you the prompt. Your homework was. Let's go back to the question. Was it the empower? Yeah. What is one thing you will work on to support and/or empower women within your campus community or your peer community? I think that's what you responded to in your reflection, right?
Well, actually, I think what I wrote I was actually responding to a different prompt, but I think it relates back to that one too. So the prompt I was responding to was, what was your most empowering takeaway from OLC Innovate? And I'm one of those people, I reflect on things a lot, so just in the moment when this happened, I wouldn't have been like, oh my gosh, that was like the most empowering moment. But now that I've had time to really just kind of let it simmer and think, and Michael Berman's name has already come up once, so I'm going to mention him again. I am fortunate to work directly with Michael at Channel Islands, as well as many other fabulous people on my team, including Jill Leifstedt and Michael McGarry and Christy O'Neill-Gonzalez. But anywho, he was being showcased before the lightning talks. I don't know if you folks remember that Kathleen Ives was showcasing particular OLC members and their innovative practices, or innovations in OLC members. And so a slide of Michael Berman came up, and of course we all got really excited. But what was really interesting to me was the way that Michael framed the innovations, and there was no use of the word I. It was all about enabling faculty, inspiring faculty, and references to what we've done as a team. And for a CIO to do that, I think really demonstrates the kind of inclusive environment that he values and that he strives to cultivate. And it just made me kind of realize why I feel so welcome there, and it makes you see things in a different way. But what I wrote about in my reflections, a little bit deeper than that, is these two kinds of power. Going back to the work of Brene Brown, who I'm reading all of her stuff right now about vulnerability and shame, and she talks about there being power over and real power. And power over requires like a hierarchy, right? So the person in power has to have more power than other people. So what that does, it starts to create this notion that there's a scarcity of power because not everybody can have it. But real power is there's an endless amount of real power. And so we can create environments where everybody has that power. It makes you feel more comfortable. It makes you it empowers you to find your own voice, to speak up for yourself, and to live authentically. And so I saw a real correlation between that moment and the concept of power. I don't know if that makes sense, but it does in my mind.
So I used to teach conflict at Arizona State, and it's very interesting because we talk about conflict, the different reasons you have conflict. One of it's sort of like this fight over power, lack of resources, different things. So it's a very interesting take on it that, there's infinite amount of power. Because a lot of times we have this perception, almost misperception, especially within a unit or institution or a field, that power is limited, and that puts us in that competitive cycle, which can lead to conflict. And that's a really great take on it, that that's maybe not the case. By the way, love your glasses.
Oh, thank you.
Love them.
To them. I'm going to have to do all my avatars over.
You're going to see it on the back channel anyway, Michelle, but you are like a shampoo commercial, and I love you. And I just want to point out that Michelle...
Light.
Yeah, she has great light. But
well, you know, I kind of am in front of this camera a lot because I work remotely, so I've got some things figured out.
Pro ladies.
Yeah. I need to buy a light because this is not working. But anyway, Michelle was one of the first people to reach out and help me find that empowerment, that mentorship network. I met Michelle shortly after I met Tanya, and the thing I remember about her was she seemed like such a rock star to me, and she is. But she was also very inclusive and saying, hey, how can I help you? What can I connect you to? What are the things? And she was very empowering. So when I say, you know, Michelle's like a shampoo commercial, she's everything I want to be. This is what I look to when I'm trying to figure out how to empower people. You know, I just want to shout out to Michelle.
Thank you. That's very nice.
I will say something we talked about is we have some strong ladies and we have some strong friends and colleagues, and all of you are in that circle of mine. And I think it's okay to be, we talked about showing some vulnerabilities and not strong moments. So the epic fail that Nori did during her lightning talk, which was amazing, I think was great. We need to share more failures and like flaws, because people aren't perfect. If anyone thinks that, that's hilarious. And you don't
I
have
should
to
wear a
really
shirt
Google.
that says epic fail.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that was a conversation that someone said, this leader of my institution, she was the VP of academics, she's the president. I actually saw her in a weak moment, and that made me feel better and be okay about myself. And I was like, yes, exactly. So Nori, thank you for your epic fail, by the way.
Yes, but you know what, that my own personal thing was, I had a bunch of people come up to me and say something that they thought that was really courageous. And I thought, well, I don't know, in the age of like design thinking being a really popular and espoused topic, like the whole point of design thinking is fail, iteration, fail, iteration, fail, iteration. So I thought I was getting up there with kind of this design mentality like, well, yeah, obviously it was a fail because eventually I got to the message I want to give you. But no, I think, and I've talked about my mentor before. I had a mentor and a gentleman named Bob Blackney, and he told me when he first took me under his wing, he really said, I see you for who you are. He told me when I was in my early 30s, you work hard so that you can play hard. And he knew that when I was at work, he was going to get every single thing out of me, and when I went home, I was gone. And he acknowledged that first and foremost. And then the second big thing he said to me was, if you're not failing 20% of the time, you're doing what you're comfortable with, and that's not why I'm hiring you. We were in, this was like the late 90s, in the newest thing, which was technology development, getting technology into classrooms. He's like, we don't know anything. So if you're not failing, then you're not on my team. So I appreciate that you think that was vulnerable, and probably it was, but I thank my mentor who taught me to be vulnerable a long time ago when it comes to trying to do things that are innovative.
Man, why is it the hour? I just want to talk to you ladies all the time. Okay, so we are at the hour, and we're going to probably end the podcast and then secretly talk offline. No, we hope to one day do an after-hour, non-recorded version. We're working out some logistics, and we're working on centralizing a few things as far as a website. Hey, listen, we're low budget. We're hoping a vineyard would sponsor us. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're working on it.
In California.
Don't even start. I'm already plotting.
All your vineyard friends, we need help, listeners.
I'm coming to Niagara Falls for your next podcast, which is May 18th, just saying. So vineyards, you want to open up your doors? Let us know. A few of us will show up. Probably a lot of us, actually. I will say thank you for Michelle. This conversation doesn't have to be over. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll tweet out the Google form because a few of you want to be part of this community where you get semi-regular updates, not spam, of happenings online and happenings at events that we expect to happen continually. So please get in touch. Let us know where we are. Someone tweet it out. And until we meet the following Wednesday on May 18th, love from all of us. Cheers.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for inviting me.